An independent inquiry has ruled the fatal stabbing of schoolboy Bailey Gwynne could have been avoided if those who knew his killer carried weapons had spoken out. But the review's author says it was an unplanned, spontaneous conflict that could not have been predicted or averted on the day. Andrew Lowe has made a series of recommendations, including a change in the law to give teachers more power to search pupils. Colin White reports.
Social work expert Andrew Lowe outlined his findings this morning at the headquarters of Aberdeen City Council. He spent months investigating the tragic events of last October and the row between Bailey Gwynne and another boy, known as Child A.
The course of the conflict was fatally altered by the possession of a bladed weapon by one of these boys. This was potentially predictable and avoidable if those who knew that Child A carried weapons in school had reported this to staff.
The tragedy unfolded around lunchtime at Cults Academy in October last year. An argument broke out between Bailey and his killer, a fellow pupil. Bailey was stabbed in the heart. He died in hospital hours later. In March, at the High Court in Aberdeen, after a 5-day trial, Bailey's killer, who can't be identified because of his age, was convicted of culpable homicide. In April, at the High Court in Edinburgh, Bailey's family were there to see his killer sentenced to 9 years detention. By then, Andrew Lowe had been appointed to lead an independent review into Bailey's death. Today, he published his findings. His 21 recommendations include urging the Scottish Government to amend the legislation for searching pupils. He also wants them to explore further legislation on the purchase of weapons online. Bailey's killer bought his knife on the internet. And he'd like a better sharing of knowledge about weapons among teachers, parents and pupils.
What I hope this report will make clear to all the children and the staff and everybody in the community that is the school is that they have a responsibility towards each other, and that responsibility to create a safe learning environment is a responsibility that bears on everyone.
Bailey Gwynne's killer often brought a knife to school. Some pupils knew that. Head teacher Anna Muirhead had spoken to him about weapons 2 years before the attack.
Well, it was all dealt with in the usual manner. He was interviewed by myself. Everything was put in his file. We dealt very closely with his parents throughout that period. So there was nothing untoward.
But Scotland's teachers say any move to give them new powers of stop and search is unacceptable.
Teachers in Scotland are trained to teach, to deliver education. They're not trained to provide a policing service for pupils in schools.
The Lowe review has given the Scottish Government much to consider. Weapons in schools are not unique to Aberdeen, and today it was revealed that since the Bailey Gwynne attack, there have been a further 15 incidents involving weapons in the city's schools. Ministers have much to consider.
We've got to look very carefully at the considerations, the recommendations that have been put forward by the Lowe report. We'll look at those within the context of wider government policy as we consider the implications of the Lowe report. But the first and primary consideration we have today is to remember Bailey Gwynne and express our sympathies to his family at the loss that they have suffered.
Bailey's family have so far made no comment. Andrew Lowe said he'd spoken to them only yesterday and they'd shown remarkable dignity. Colin White, STV News, Aberdeen.
Now let's turn to one of the other news stories today. A fatal stabbing at a school in Aberdeen was potentially avoidable if teachers had been told that a pupil was carrying weapons. Was one of the findings of an inquiry published today. Bailey Gwynne, who was 16, was stabbed to death by a fellow pupil during a fight at Cults Academy. It happened in October of last year. His killer, who can't be named for legal reasons, was later jailed for 9 years after being found guilty of culpable homicide. The report says that the Scottish Government should consider legal changes to give teachers more power to search pupils. Our correspondent Ben Andrews sent us a report.
Beneath a willow tree in the heart of the school garden is the memorial to Bailey Gwynne. Described as shy and gentle, in October last year he was fatally stabbed by a fellow pupil in a lunch break scuffle over a biscuit. His killer's now serving a 9-year sentence for culpable homicide. His trial, he'd taken the knife to school on other occasions to seem tough, but no one had told a teacher. Had that been done, said today's report, Bailey's death could have been avoided.
The course of the conflict was fatally altered by the possession of a bladed weapon
by one of these boys. This was potentially predictable and avoidable if those who knew that child A carried weapons in school had reported this to staff.
The report makes 21 recommendations, among them that parents and children should be encouraged to share information about pupils carrying weapons, that teachers in Scotland should be given greater powers to search students, and the Scottish Government should look at restrictions on internet weapons sales, after the killer told police he bought his knife on Amazon because there are no age checks online. But Bailey Gwynne and his killer were just 2 pupils among more than 1,000.
And for the school, the questions aren't just about how this happened, but also how they managed the welfare of all those other pupils in the year since this tragedy and going forward.
We gave young people advice on how to cope, how to feel free to show their emotions, if you like. But similarly, if they hadn't been particularly affected, we told them they didn't need to pretend. The young ones could still go out and play at break time and could still laugh with their friends.
It certainly affected me. I think it affected everybody in school, whether it was his close mates or whether it was someone who just maybe seen him around in the corridor.
At Cults Academy, the memorial tree is to be joined by a stained glass window. For the wider education system, it's hoped the legacy of Bailey Gwynne's death will be greater clarity about how to keep school children safe by keeping knives out of schools. Ben Ando, BBC News, Aberdeen.